All right, well, welcome everyone to the District 44 Legislative Forum. My name is Carla Rose Hansen, and Josh Boucher is with us as well. Senator Merrill Pepcorn isn't able to be with us today, but we're really happy to spend a little bit of time with you this Saturday morning to just recap the 2021 legislative session and tell you a little bit about all the good things that did pass to help North Dakotans, some of the things that we weren't too happy that passed, and then some missed opportunities as well. So we'll just spend a little time giving you a recap, and then I'm happy to take your questions and kind of dig into anything that you want more details on. So maybe we'll start out with, I'll turn it over to Josh. And Josh, if you want to maybe give some highlights and lowlights, and then I can do the same, and then we'll do some questions.
Sure. So yeah, good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us. Always great to see so many friendly faces, and of course for us to be home and home for a long while. So it has been a long 4 months, and I think for a lot of North Dakotans, not only as we continue to deal through the public health and economic impacts of the pandemic, but also the yo-yo or ping-ponging that the legislature makes us all go through, whether it's the individual things we're each tracking or issues that are important to our families or workplaces. So a lot of what I'm going to talk about is going to be a little bit more about the budget. That's just where I spend a lot more of my time in my role as the leader of our caucus. And then, of course, the last 3 weeks of the session has been really focused on that. So some of the significant highlights of the budget is, traditionally our state budget combined, we do a biennial budget. So July 1st of 2021 through June 30th of 2023. In the last several years, that's been in the $14 billion range. This year, our budget is $16.9 billion. And that significant increase is from a couple different funding sources, but primarily a lot of the federal resources that have come to this state related to coronavirus relief. We have our general operating, we call it our general fund, and that is about $4.9 billion. And the general fund is generally the taxes you and I pay for income, for sales tax, for sometimes gas tax goes in there. A variety of revenue sources go into the general fund. And then that's what's used to pay for state government. And a significant portion of our budget is education, K-12 education, higher education, and the Department of Human Services, which is now being merged with the Department of Health. So similar to the federal Department of Health and Human Services, we will have a state level Department of Health and Human Services. So of that $4.9 billion, or that $4.9 billion makes up roughly a quarter of the total $16.9 billion budget. And so most of the $16.9 billion budget is a lot of oil resources or oil tax resources. So a lot of times the oil money goes into separate buckets, and then we reallocate that into the state budget. So it doesn't get counted as our general fund money. And then, of course, significant amount of that, approximately $3.3 billion, is federal money from the different, what we're calling tranches of federal resources. And in the legislature, our nomenclature has become there's 3 different buckets of the federal program. So Trump 1, Trump 2, and Biden bucks. And so you would probably know them more familiar from what you read in the paper. There's the Coronavirus Relief Fund, which is Trump 1. That was from last March. And then this past December, Trump 2 was the I forget what they called that one specifically, but it was the second relief fund. And then Biden bucks is the American Rescue Plan. And so we still, if you recall, last year in March, we started receiving $1.25 billion from the federal government for the state to respond to and offset some of the impacts of the pandemic. We still had a significant portion of that left. About $112 million was unspent. So we reallocated that in this next budget. Some of those things include there were certain businesses that did not qualify for previous relief. So specifically, there was $2 million set aside for travel agents and those ancillary companies. They did not qualify for any relief before, both federally and state. And then I was able to work with our event centers, so places like Sanctuary Events, Fargo Theater, the different arts and festivals throughout the state. We were able to earmark $2 million for those event centers, and the producers and the people who do the production, the sound and lighting, to be able to apply for some additional funding. You might have heard of the National Save Our Stages Act. That was part of Biden Bucks or the American Rescue Plan. The nuance there is most of our facilities in the state did not qualify for that, because one of the key check boxes that they have to mark is that the majority of their income has to be from generated ticket sales. And so most of our venues do have ticket sales. So places like the Fargo Theater, generally, for the most part, everything's ticketed. So they would probably qualify for that. The Fargo Dome would qualify. The Shields Event Center would qualify. But places like Sanctuary Event Center or blanking on the Pines out in rural Cass County, since they do so many events, it's corporate events, it's weddings, it's private parties, on top of sometimes having a concert where they would have ticket sales. They do not qualify for that federal program. So we were able to supplant some state dollars to help support those folks. Additionally, within there is some money for well, we were able to offset salaries for Department of Corrections, Highway Patrol, and some of the Department of Health and Human Services departments. So about 78 million of that is offsetting salaries and benefits for those departments specifically. Specific to the American Rescue Plan, so what we call Biden Bucks 2, that is money that is still coming. We were able to set it aside in our budget, but we will have to come back in during a special session to actually allocate that appropriately, because we still don't know what the rules are in a lot of that. It's a lot of money coming to us, and there's several different buckets. The first bucket is K-12 education, and then local and county governments, all based on different formulas, are just going to get direct allocation. So it'll pass through the state treasury and then go out to them. So the city of Fargo will get its own several $1 million. Cass County will get several millions. Fargo Public Schools will get several millions. We're talking about tens of millions of dollars, which will be good to help offset, especially some of the delayed learning impacts. So, in the school district specifically, we as the state, we're not able to tell them how they can spend that money. So many school districts are going to be doing it to beef up their literacy programs, to help support paraprofessionals, and get more folks in that can help students with after school programs, preschool programs. And then in rural North Dakota, a number of schools just don't have the resources or the population to assess additional property taxes. So they're able to use it for some of their deferred maintenance, or if they need to add on to the school, or some school districts even may be building new schools with it. So it'll be a significant impact to our K-12 system. But the state also is getting $870 million that is going directly to Department of Human Services, the Department of Health, Public Instruction, Transportation. That again, we as the legislature do not get to dictate. So on top of that $877 million, we will receive approximately $1 billion more dollars. That is what the legislature will call itself back in, or ask the governor to call us back in at a later date once we know the rules. And that's where we're going to be able to set aside money, again, to either offset revenue impacts to our state, or meet other emerging needs that we are specifically dealing with. And then the final part about that, which is really interesting about the American Rescue Plan or Biden Bucks, is North Dakota is receiving $112 million just to build things. It's called a capital fund. Every state's getting a minimum of 100 million, and then based on a formula, you get additional. So we, based on that formula, get an additional 12 to 13 million dollars. The significant amount of that has been earmarked. 70 million of that has been earmarked for career and technical academies throughout the state. So as you're familiar here in Fargo-Moorhead, or Cass County specifically, we've been having a lot of conversations. And so what it requires is the local community to do a one-to-one match. And it'll look different in each community. You know, Cass County, we're building a giant facility, so we'll qualify probably for the full $10 million max we can get. But other school districts throughout the state might be just building on a new wing or a new shop. And so they would just need, you know, 500,000 or $1 million of that. Dickinson is ready to go with a career and technical academy. Watford City and Wilson have been talking about it. Minot's been talking about it. Bismarck has the model program, and that's what they've had theirs, I think, nearly a decade in conjunction with Bismarck State College. So that's been the model a lot of the communities have looked at. So that's exciting. And then on top of that, University of North Dakota is receiving some money, Dickinson State. And we also were able to take care of significant deferred maintenance with that money for the State Historical Society. They're receiving $4.2 million to specifically do some technology upgrades, some safety upgrades, some ADA accessibility in their sites throughout they have sites in every county of the state. And then the Parks and Rec Department is getting 11.7 million, and that's to beef up their facilities. We have a new director, or newer director of Parks and Rec, Andrea Travnik, who I think is a phenomenal woman. She's a Bison, did her PhD program at NDSU, went and worked under the Dalrymple administration as the water engineer and really the go-to person in disaster relief. She went out and worked for the federal government under the Trump administration and came back over a year ago. But she is just a dynamic young female leader who is telling the state, you know, you all keep trickling by with how you fund our Parks and Rec. There are ways we can do this and go get more money, outside money to come in. So she has been brought to the challenge of taking this. We've increased a lot of our resources to State's Park and Rec under the tutelage that she's going to go double or triple that money with federal money or private grants and foundation money. So it'll be exciting to see us put a really big emphasis on outdoor recreation and the Parks and Rec system throughout the state, because it's certainly one of our assets that I think we very few of us have accessed or utilized. So it's exciting to see the energy and the trust being brought to her in that department. So yeah, I think I'll stop there. It's a lot of the big exciting things. You know, I think the biggest takeaway for my perspective, and as Carla and others have talked, is we have been able to still continue to fund the needed services throughout North Dakota. I was asked by a reporter this week about, you know, the budget growing so much and what does that mean? And I said, we shouldn't be evaluated by how much or how little we spend. We should be evaluated by the priorities in our budget. And I think it's exciting to see that there were not the cuts that were proposed to human services, to K-12 education, to you know, transportation. We will still have a fully funded budget for the most part. There's certainly a lot of challenges ahead, but I think we've done our due diligence, and you know, that's thanks to the work of North Dakotans everywhere continuing to spend their money in the state and our economy being stronger than what we expected it to be. Carla?
Awesome. Thank you for that overview. I'm always grateful for Josh's deep understanding about the budget. So thank you for that. So I'll just go over a few things a little bit related to budget, but also policy. I'll hit on some things that I think our district especially would consider a highlight, some things that are okay, but maybe we would have liked to see a little bit better, and then some lowlights as well from the session as a whole. So in terms of highlights, I think one area that a lot of people in our district would consider a highlight is that the legislature approved a needs-based budget for the university system. So this is what the higher ed board had asked for, was a needs-based budget. If you remember back to last year, the governor had asked for a 7.5% cut to the university system budget, and that would have resulted in several hundred more positions being cut on top of you know, all the cuts that we've sustained in previous legislative sessions. So that would have been a really deep impact to universities like NDSU. So we were really pleased that what ultimately got passed was what the higher ed board really wanted, which was a needs-based budget. Also related to our university system was in the bonding bill, which was a major piece of legislation this session, was some funding for Harris Hall, which is our agricultural building, one of the ag buildings on the campus here. And a lot of people who work there, maybe jokingly, not so jokingly, call it like a working museum. So it's really in bad need of some updates. So we were glad to see that Harris Hall received some more funding through the bonding bill. Another highlight I would say from the session is just the safety of the legislators and the staff and the public and the lobbyists who all attended this year. You know, we had an unprecedented year because of COVID. We had some safety precautions in place for that. And we were a little worried that there might be some outbreaks of COVID because we're so close together in the space that we share. But really that was pretty minimal. And so I would say that we were pretty happy that there was very few infections among lawmakers and staff this past 4 months. Another highlight actually related to the pandemic was the greater accessibility to the public. The money that we received from some of the early federal relief funds allowed us to stream a lot of the committee meetings so that the public, in addition to watching the floor sessions and how we vote on the bills, the public was also able to see the detailed deliberations and testimony in all of the committee meetings. And I think that was just a huge highlight in terms of being able to be more accessible, more transparent on how we do our work. And a lot of the public was also able to testify remotely without having to drive across the state just to give, you know, a 5-minute testimony. And that was really huge. I was really glad to see that happen. So I would say those were the highlights. Two things that I would say were positive, but I would have liked to see us go a little further, were also related to the budget. K through 12 funding, what we finally settled on this week was a 1% increase each year of the upcoming biennium. So 1% in the first year, 1% in the second year. And that is specifically for the per pupil funding. It's specifically geared toward raises for teachers and staff, excluding administrators. And this is really important because our teachers have had really stepped up this past year. It was one of the toughest years in memory, having to adjust how they do their work during the pandemic, teaching remotely, teaching in a hybrid model for a lot of school districts. And so I was glad that we at least did the 1% and 1%. We, of course, would have liked to see a little bit higher, but at least it was better than flat, because we know that costs don't stay flat in the going forward. Another area that was at least something, but we would have liked to see a little bit more, was raises for state employees. So again, we're grateful for the work they do to make sure that services are delivered in a quality way to all of North Dakota citizens. And we need to make sure that they have good compensation so that we can attract and retain talent to these important jobs, because we're in competition with the private sector. So we were glad to see raises to some degree, and some good parameters on that for minimums for the people who are at the lower end of the spectrum on wages. But again, would have been nice to be a little bit more, but we were glad to see what we did do. The lowlights of the 2021 session were unfortunately many. We had probably more than we can remember in terms of legislation that was unnecessary, unconstitutional, and divisive. And so we were glad that some of this was defeated. Unfortunately, some of it did pass. Just a few I'll list off. There was a number of bills related to targeting the transgender members of our community. The one that got the most headlines was the one related to limiting transgender youth athletes from what team they can play on. Ultimately, that did not become law because the legislature, even though the legislature passed it, the governor vetoed it, and then the Senate failed to uphold that veto. So it did not become law. But unfortunately, there were a couple other bills related to targeting the transgender members of our community. And luckily, those also did not go forward. You might know that we passed a bill, and it did become law, related to allowing our K through 12 schools to display the 10 commandments. Again, this is unconstitutional and really puts our K through 12 schools at risk of a lawsuit if they should choose to do that. We had a whole pile of bills related to masks and vaccines. Unfortunately, a little bit of those did go forward. We had a bill that passed and became law related to prohibiting the governor and the public health officer from enacting a mask mandate at the statewide level. That was vetoed by the governor, but both chambers overrode the veto, so that did become law. We also had a large number of bills related to vaccines. Again, one of those, was passed by both chambers, although it hasn't, I believe the governor hasn't taken action on it yet, but it's about prohibiting a so-called vaccine passport. So the concern by the proponents of this bill is that the government or private businesses might require individuals, customers, or people being served by the government to show that they've been vaccinated in order to go into that restaurant, go onto an airplane, get services from a government. So unfortunately, that passed both chambers. It's important to note that K through 12 schools and higher ed institutions are exempt from that. So that's important to note. It's also important to note that there is a limiting factor on there in that it's not in effect if there's an emergency order. And also it only applies to vaccines that are have an emergency use authorization from the FDA. And most vaccines have been approved by the FDA. So this really only applies to the COVID vaccines while they're under emergency use. And hopefully by the end of the summer, they'll have full authority from the FDA. So it wouldn't apply once that happens. We also saw a record number of bills during this legislative session related to restricting election, our ability to vote in elections. Most of the most extreme bills related to elections did get defeated. So that was good news. Let's see, a couple other extreme policy bills from this session. You might not remember this one. This is from the beginning. We had a bill that would have designated American as a race on state forms. So when you're checking which race you are, American would have been listed as one of them. That did not become law. Luckily, that was silly. We also had a few anti-abortion bills, also did not make it through the process that we were glad to see. And then one last one that we are still waiting for the final outcome is you might know that there was a bill to provide funding to all the university foundations for challenge grants. Challenge grants provide a state match to private dollars to the foundations to be used as scholarships for our university students. And this is a very popular program with our higher ed institutions. And that was hijacked by some of the more extreme members of the legislature to provide some amendments on that prohibited our universities from working basically with Planned Parenthood is really who it targeted. And so we did pass that in both chambers without the support of me and Josh Boucher. So we understood that those provisions definitely have political interference with academic freedom and are unconstitutional because of that, because academic freedom is constitutionally protected. And it was extremely ridiculous. There was budget cuts and criminal charges attached to that amendment. So both chambers did pass that bill. That's Senate Bill 2030. And now we're waiting to see what the governor does with that. So a long list of lowlights with a wide variety of topics. Some passed, some didn't, thankfully, but it definitely was a year to remember because of that. So that's what I'll share. And I guess we can take some questions now. Let's see, I'll check the chat area, see what questions we have in the chat. This is a question, Josh, maybe you can answer this. Any money designated for early childhood education, either from state general funds or from some of the federal relief dollars that we got?
Yeah, so I was just going through, and I'll post the link. The governor's office did a really good job of putting out comprehensive list of what they're considering successes, but there's a lot of crossover from what we would also agree with that. And within, we saw a huge shift this session in support of pre-K or early childhood education. Traditionally, especially in the House, there has been a contingent of legislators who have not supported any type of expansion of state support of early childhood education, whether that's childcare or pre-K education. But over the interim, the Department of Public Instruction and the Department of Human Services has done a lot of work with some of those legislators and actually took them on some exploratory trips to Alabama, I think, and there was one other state, conservative-leaning states who have done a good job at investing in their young children. And actually, Utah was the other one, because there's a key legislator there who, very conservative, who has switched his entire mentality around it once he started doing his jail ministry and recognizing that, some of these challenges people face come out of their childhood and the trauma they face. And so has really become a proselytizer of supporting early child education, because we know that if we can support kids downstream, it leads to better outcomes and less concerns later in people's lives. And so we did see a significant shift. There is some grants. House Bill 1466 is providing grants to early childhood education programs. And as I understand it, they're pretty specific in what those programs have to be doing. So it's not just grants to support any form of early childhood education. It's pretty specific to, I think, some curriculum or some outcomes. And that's to help support high quality early learning experiences, providing support and coaching with the staff that work there. And so that's a good start. And we did not have, I can't recall, Carla, I don't know if you can, any of the dramatic conversations or debate on the floor related to any form of early childhood education like we did in the 2019 session. So I think a big win. As the department or the director of human services has really helped enlighten me. One of the things he says is, we put billions of dollars into K-12 education, hundreds of millions of dollars into higher ed, hundreds of millions of dollars into our correction system and our Department of Human Services, and we barely put any money into kids. So if we start shifting some of those resources downstream or upstream, I always get that wrong, but into kids and helping them and their families be successful, we know that we'll have less costs as a state and as taxpayers later on in their life and have improved outcomes for everybody. So that was, I think, a good big win, but not talked about a lot, because as Carla highlighted, there ended up being a lot of headlines grabbing legislation that really obscured some of the good things that happened this session.
What other questions you guys have? Question from Curtis about 2030. So a lot of entities have asked the governor to veto Senate Bill 2030. That's the bill that originally started out as challenge grants, but was hijacked with the anti-Planned Parenthood, anti-NDSU amendments. So the governor has had a variety of meetings, both with the leadership of NDSU, State Board of Higher Education, the university system, to really more deeply understand the legal impacts of that bill, as well as the other consequences it could have in terms of being able to recruit and retain staff and faculty and students to our universities. It went to his desk shortly before we adjourned for the whole session. So I've heard mixed things, Josh, maybe you know. So I heard that he has until 7 a.m. today to veto it, but actually after we adjourn, then he has 15 days to take care of any bill that gets to him after we adjourn. So I'm not quite sure of which timeline is accurate.
Well, and that's the differentiation. The Constitution says he has 3 legislative days while we are in session. When we are not in session, it's my understanding it was 22 weekdays. And so I'm curious where the 15 is coming from, but if that's what folks are hearing from his office, that's clearly the stance that he's taking. So we'll have to wait a little longer. I think what I tried to convey to our legislative colleagues, and I know Carla, especially, she did a lot of one-on-one conversations, especially around people who were making decisions at the committee level. Beyond the conversation around Planned Parenthood or abortion or reproductive health care, the legislature getting involved with what faculty can and cannot teach and what they can and cannot research is extremely harmful. We know that in other forms of government around the world, that is status quo. And in our democracy, we have respected academic freedom as a part of the First Amendment and freedom of speech. And the hypocrisy of passing Senate Bill 2030 while also passing a bill which was House Bill 1503, which was dubbed the Freedom of Speech Bill, which was supported by outside state group, a conservative nonprofit, who was saying that students and faculty who are not or are conservative or Christian are being mistreated on campuses. Yet there's not been a single case brought forward in North Dakota. There's no documentation, and no students or faculty from North Dakota got up and said this is a problem. So at the same time, we passed a bill that said that freedom of speech, regardless of the content, needs to be protected on a campus, except for in Senate Bill 2030, which is around Planned Parenthood specifically. But the dangerous slippery slope, and I know many of you here work in higher ed or have a close relationship to higher ed, is what's next? I mean, does this mean that folks from the Democratic caucus, when they have control, can start limiting oil and gas research? Does this mean that we can't research certain types of things related to certain types of animals because someone has a certain feeling about that animal? It's just a dangerous slippery slope. And unfortunately, many of our colleagues, it's hard because as many of you reached out to us trying to have really rational conversations and wanting us to have rational conversations, the hard part is so many of our colleagues are not part of a rational conversation. It is about virtue points and virtue votes. And that's really hard to govern with and to try to work with. And I can tell you that within the majority party, there are a number of legislators who quietly talk about how frustrated they are that this is what they get painted with. And so we have continued to push them that they have to stop saying it quietly and they have to start speaking out loud and work with the governor and business leaders and higher ed professionals and whatnot. I heard from a number of constituents in our district who consider themselves to be pro-life people who work at the university, but they had said this is a dangerous slippery slope. I do not support Planned Parenthood or abortion, but I don't want my research attacked or the conversations we have in our classroom attacked. And that there's certainly a recognition universally of folks who work in education of the impacts of this. So I'm hopeful the governor is able to line item veto the bill to take out the policy part. I think the second part of the question that Curtis asked was about overriding the veto. And yes, anytime the legislature meets between now and essentially November 30th of 2022, we would have the ability to potentially override the veto, and that requires 2/3 votes in both chambers. And there will be a special session for sure in December for redistricting purposes. And there are conversations if we will tie in some budget conversations with that, or do something late summer with the American Rescue Plan dollars coming to the state. So there may be some potentials, and during those times, any type of legislation theoretically could be brought forward. So it's not even overriding a veto. It's more potential bad policy that some of these protagonists or proponents of this type of legislation are pushing for.
A couple questions in the chat. Do we see any trajectory to get a bias crime bill through in the future? Not in the near future at the state level. As you might have known, Representative Ruth Buffalo introduced first a bill and then a study related to bias crimes. Some of you might know this as hate crimes. It was received in an incredibly hostile way, incredibly hostile. And the testimony against it framed it as thought crimes. And I pushed back on this in committee because they were calling them thought crimes. And how can you look at someone's intent? Well, law enforcement and prosecutors look at intent all the time. If I were responsible for someone's death, my intention behind the crime would absolutely factor into what I'm charged with. Are you charged with murder? Or are you charged with manslaughter? Was it an accident, or was it planned in advance? Your intention absolutely matters when you're looking at crimes and what you're charged with. And then some white collar crimes, your intention is necessary for a crime to be charged. Like if you're filling out, some bank documents, for example, some financial documents, if you're misrepresenting your financial numbers, like too high or too low to, get yourself a personal benefit, is it just a mistake, or are you doing that in order to, do some fraud? Your intention absolutely matters with a lot of crimes. So it was frustrating to hear this pushback. It was described as, trying to create more division and identity politics, things like that. So I definitely don't see anything happening in the near future. I'm really glad to see that the Fargo City Commission is pushing forward at the local level. I think with a lot of policies that we've done in the state, starting at the local level and building up from there is often a good approach. So I don't know if Josh wants to add to that.
Yeah, I think the only thing I'll add, and maybe this is just Josh explaining too much to you all, but I think the important piece, beyond having a policy on the books for bias-related crimes and potentially enhanced penalties of that, is because our states and jurisdictions within the state do not have a bias-related crime statute or ordinance, there are federal resources that are left on the table. And so we know within law enforcement, as well as within our state's attorney's office, they are limited in time and in people and in resources. And that determines sometimes what types of effort or energy they put into investigation specifically. And the Federal Department of Justice does provide additional resources to states that have this level of statute to support the in-depth investigation, to protect all parties involved. As Carla said, how do you find that intent? What do you, it's not always as clear cut as the individual who vandalized the Islamic Center in Moorhead, where, it was clear based on Facebook posts and, personal relationships are saying that this individual has made these kinds of comments before. Sometimes it is much more deceptive, or may not be intentional, again, based on a bias or not. So it's those resources that I would be offering for our law enforcement and for our prosecutors to be able to do a good, thorough job to ensure justice for all parties involved. And I think that's a key part that gets caught up, because as Carla talks about, it became such a hostile conversation about divisiveness and false flags than about what does this mean about making sure North Dakota is a safer place, and law enforcement and our local prosecutors have resources to do their work.
Okay, another question from our chat. Any comments on combining the Health and Human Services departments? I wasn't involved in the committee hearings on that, so I don't have the detailed kind of pros and cons. At a high level, I think, some of the thought behind that is that there might be some greater efficiencies because now you're not necessarily duplicating some of the leadership, the administration at the federal level. At the federal level, these departments are combined. So we have a federal Health and Human Services department. So maybe there's some greater connection points between federal and state. And then I would say the third advantage might be there's a lot of approaches that are sort of public health oriented and then direct service delivery oriented that could have some greater synergies. And I think of one example as suicide prevention, right? Suicide prevention there's definitely a public health component of that. We want to create prevention efforts, especially with with audiences that might have a greater rate of suicide, like our youth, maybe farmers, veterans. These are some population groups that have a higher rate of suicide. So what can we do to prevent that in programming efforts? But then there's also on the human services side, direct services that are involved with, behavioral health to also prevent those tragedies. So I think there are some things we can do to create some synergies. There are also concerns that now this is a really, really huge area. The human services part of the state budget is the biggest, it's the biggest area of our state budget. I think this upcoming biennium, it's about $4.5 billion, if I'm remembering right. And the Department of Health is smaller, but now if you're adding health to human services, then it becomes an even more gigantic area of state government. So I guess those are my just high level thoughts. Josh, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, I initially, I like the concept. And I initially voted for the bill. It started in the House in January, and we voted on it, I suppose, sometime in February, and I supported it then. But the more we had discussions throughout session, the less of a fan I got from a planning standpoint. I think it's certainly a direction we can go to, but it was an idea proposed, I think, in December. A lot of energy around it because, again, it came from some legislators who sometimes aren't always forward thinking. And so it was exciting to see that there was this interest. And as Carla talked about, I think a lot of it was about breaking down silos. The Department of Health in 2017, we broke off a lot of the environmental components of the Department of Health and created the Department of Environmental Quality. So that moved out some of the water programs, spills, disaster, inspections of manufacturing plants. And that was to give them some more autonomy and focus. And so then the Department of Health really is focused on public health and prevention and education and some great resources. So I understand the wanting to bring it in with the Department of Human Services to help break down those silos and create some efficiencies. But also in the last several years, we have converted our county social services into regional zones under the Department of Human Services. And that has been a lot bumpier than expected. And communication needs to be improved there. And it's been one of those things where something happens and then it gets communicated and decisions are made instead of a thoughtful plan of transitioning, whether it's, employees, programs, and so forth. And so I think there's just a lot going on in the Department of Human Services. So for me, in the second half, when I had a second vote on it, I actually voted against it. Still passed overwhelmingly in the House, but the Senate, I believe it only passed by one vote because the Senate had spent a lot of time, and Senator Kathy Hogan, Senator Tim Mathern, Senator Judy Lee, all three huge proponents of human service programs and health and strong practitioners. I think they questioned a lot of it. So I trusted their judgment. And so, but it's moving forward. They both have, the merger is happening. I believe they have 2 years to work on putting together a plan. We passed separate budgets, so they do have their own we haven't combined their budget yet. Both of their budgets are significantly federal resourced. So it is massive programmatic dollars coming from the federal government. And at the same time, we do have a new, we was able to just meet him the other day, our new, Carla, I'm blanking on his title, health director.
Chief Health Officer.
Chief Health Officer, yes, who's coming from out of state, an individual the governor hired a couple months ago. And so he was in the chamber, came and met folks. He starts Monday officially. So yeah, so there's a lot of moving parts and a lot going on there. So I had concerns, but I'm hopeful it works out, because another thing that the Director of Human Services shared on a call before the session was, I think they estimate well over 300,000 North Dakotans are directly impacted by the work of the Department of Human Services. When you think about long-term care, early childhood education, assistance programs, our families or as individuals, we access the Department of Human Services. So the decisions we make about how that department runs impacts the vast majority of North Dakotans and their families.
Another question from our chat. Do we see any anti-trans bills coming up before the next legislative session? Is that possible during the special session? So I don't know if anyone's really thinking about the 2023 session yet. We're still recovering from the 2021 session. But just to kind of recap of the things that we saw during 2021 that were targeting our transgender members of the community, there was House Bill 1298. That was, as I mentioned earlier in the list of lowlights, the one targeting youth athletes. But we also had one related to adoptions. So anti-LGBT bill, excluding members of the LGBT community from adopting kids or receiving state assistance to do that, but allowing straight couples to get this assistance, but that failed. And then there was a third bill that was super bizarre. It was really long, and it talked about drag queen story hour, and it was really weird, and that one got withdrawn. So we definitely saw more in terms of active targeting. I hope that we don't see anything more like that. Usually what we have done in the past is we try to bring forward something like a bill to extend the non-discrimination law to protect members of the LGBT community in the areas of like housing and employment. And so we're trying to do something, proactive and more, and it's defeated. Usually that's more of the conversations that we have, but this year we saw more of the attacks from the other side. And then, Barry makes a comment in the chat that there was 244 anti-LGBT bills introduced this year, 144 anti-trans bills. And it's true, it was just a wave. There's around 30 states that introduced a bill related to similar to the youth athlete bill that we saw. And then there are some states that went beyond that to actually prohibit medical treatment for youth who are trans. And so incredibly discouraging, incredibly hateful, and unnecessary. There's a lot of policies in place already that deal with this in a nuanced way. And so it was really incredibly unnecessary and hurtful, and I think can really do some great harm to these vulnerable youth. And so I'm hopeful that these kind of things don't see the light of day in North Dakota anymore. In terms of whether it's possible during a special session, Josh, you'll probably be able to answer that a little better than I could.
So as far as special session, Yes, any type of bill could be introduced, unless leadership, we were to amend our rules to limit bills, and I see that potentially happening. One of the proposals for annual sessions that got the most traction had within there that the second session would be a smaller session for budget related, and there would be a committee that would vet all legislation to determine what could go on. That's typical in a lot of different states. It would be a whole new barrier in North Dakota, and I don't know if that's a path we want to go down. But so yes, at this point, our rules would allow for any bill to be introduced unless those rules are changed. And as far as future sessions, I'm sorry to burst Carla's hopefulness, but yes, it'll be tenfold. We have gone 10 years in North Dakota without some of these bad bills. We've seen them in South Dakota for a decade. We've been fortunate they've not showed up, but the proponents of these type of legislation are completely emboldened this session, and are being very aggressive, not just on anti-trans, but also on reproductive rights, on public education, on supporting diversifying our state's economy. So those of us that would be opposed to these types of bad bills have a lot of work to do in the next 18 months to build a coalition of all stakeholders that understand that not only do these things directly impact specific North Dakotans and their families, it impacts our entire state. And when we're at a time trying to recruit and retain being the biggest thing, we are seeing our young people leave again because they don't want to be in a state, and it's not even just LGBT people leaving. It is people who have family members who are LGBT, or friends, or people they care about. I mean, it is when you can go to, especially telework, you could still work for Sanford Health or Microsoft and live in Minnesota, or live in Colorado or Washington State, or any of these other places. And so we have a lot of work to do. And I think specifically, I think there's been some gains that were made this session with the business community, who typically has not showed up around some of these quote unquote social issues, but they're not just social issues, they're economic impact issues. And so we'll have to continue working on those things.
Great questions, everyone. Any other topics you want us to cover?
Hearing none, Carla, let's close out on some of our successes that you and I and Merrill were able to. First of all, again, Merrill wasn't able to join us. He is actually down visiting his 1-year-old granddaughter. She turns 1 on Monday, so he got in the car from Bismarck, and I think basically just drove straight through, picked up Connie, and they went down to see his son and daughter-in-law and granddaughter. So. But, I think I'm excited about some of the things that our District 44 team were able to accomplish. First of all, we were part of a lot of the major conversations around passing bonding, K-12 education funding, higher ed, because we heard from folks like you and many other of our North Fargo neighbors. But, each of us kind of introduced some constituent bills too, and those are always a crapshoot if you can get the right people on board, and because sometimes they're seen as pet issues. But one thing I'm excited about, and the one bill I was able to get passed with my name as the lead sponsor, was the America 250 Commission. And that came from Sandy Sidler, who lives up here in North Fargo, a neighbor of all of ours. Sandy is the state regent of the Daughters of the American Revolution. And nationally, there was an America 250 Commission enacted by Congress, and the Daughters of American Revolution have been big proponents of this. And so essentially, it's us starting the planning for 2026, when we as a nation will celebrate 250 years of being a nation. And so it's starting a commission and some funding that'll come with it, but we brought in the tourism department, the historical society is going to lead it, Parks and Rec, Indian Affairs, the Daughters of American Revolution, a variety, DPI, Department of Public Instruction, higher ed, so we can start planning for that. And what's really beautiful about it is, there's certainly different conversation. North Dakota wasn't even a state when we were a nation. We are just, ourselves 150 years old, or 125, I forget. See, this is what, now it's recorded and it's going to be out there and probably be on some campaign against me someday. But it's just great. And really the conversation coming nationally and what the intention will be in North Dakota with the Department or the State Historical Society leading it is, what does being an American mean? And so, or a North Dakotan. And so we can really have some intentional conversations. Sometimes it might be difficult conversations, but a lot of celebration about democracy and hopefully, as we continue to be divided as a nation and within our own communities, maybe a path towards some unity and some healing of finding commonality, regardless of our race, our religion, who we love, our profession, our socioeconomic status, but understanding and rebuilding our country together. So I thank Sandy Sidler for that, for encouraging me to move that forward, and that's been fun to work with her and others on. The other piece is in the final days. I serve on the OMB budget, has a conference committee which is made up of the legislative leaders, and that's kind of our catch-all piece of legislation. And there was some funding removed at the last minute for Veterans Court, which would be a new pilot program in the northeast corner of the state. The idea there is that veterans who are going through the criminal justice system would be working with, a judge who's a veteran, the prosecutors who have veteran status, in this understanding that veterans, like youth, like people with addiction, different populations of people have unique circumstances. And so how can our criminal justice system be one of rehabilitation and education and second and third chances? So we were able to get some funding reinstated for that, so we can see how well that works and hopefully divert people from going to jail and getting the resources they need, specifically within the veterans community. So that was a highlight for me. Carla?
Awesome. Well, I'll highlight two things too. So related to constituent bills, our own North Fargo's Rick Olick brought an idea to me. Again, he did 2 years ago as well. And so this idea was about nonprofits and veterans organizations that have buildings did not have clarity in the law on how they could use their charitable gaming earnings on expenses related to property taxes and specials. The law was silent on if you could use that gaming money on those things. And so we were able to get a law passed that said you can use your gaming proceeds for property taxes and specials if you own a building. So this was just really big news for the veterans organizations that have buildings here in town. So they can do that. They did not have clarity on that before. So that was a great win for them. Another bill I'm proud of, I was the lead sponsor on a bill that requires Medicaid to cover continuous glucose monitors. These are little devices that go on your arm. If mostly it's used by people who have diabetes. It's especially needed for kids who have type 1 diabetes because it's hard for them to communicate, how their body is feeling, or if they're having especially high or really low blood sugar levels, and that can impact their health in a huge way. In fact, it can really cause people to have to go into the ER or stay in the hospital. And that's really expensive for our state. So not only will this bill passing help with better health outcomes for these folks, but it could also help reduce costs for the state because we're avoiding these really expensive emergency room visits and hospital stays when blood sugars go too high or too low. So I was really happy to see that bill passed as well. And Tracy's doing a little hand wave. Tracy's daughter was one of the people who submitted testimony on this bill. So that was really awesome too. I love having people get engaged and submit their personal stories. So thank you to Tracy's daughter too. Yeah, so that's a couple highlights from my perspective. Yeah, Josh put in the chat a comprehensive summary of from the governor's perspective of things that he felt were a success, and we do agree with a lot of the things. We have some shared priorities with both the executive branch and the majority party in the legislature in terms of some of the big rocks, if you will. So that's something you can look at too.
Yeah. Well, and as we go into post-session life, I'm going to send Carla away to an island vacation, and I'm going to sell some houses and work in my garden. And Meryl's going to walk around the neighborhood and say hi to you all 16 times a day. I think we've really appreciated the ability to connect with folks. And so, we'll still do probably our legislative updates on a quarterly basis as we work on some interim committees, but maybe even try to once or twice throughout the year check-ins like this so we can have more conversations with all of you and our North Fargo neighbors, because it's important that we stay connected, and there's still a lot going on, and especially with the special sessions we'll be having this year. So thank you all for joining us. Huge kudos to Carla. Carla does the bulk of the behind the scenes work on our team in terms of getting these set up. The newsletters, even though they come out in mine and Meryl's name, generally, well, they all are written by her, and I've only caught one typo in the 8 years of us doing this with Carla. She catches every 16 typos of mine every time. So appreciate her very much. So.
Well, and we appreciate all of you for spending part of your Saturday with us. And thank you for all the emails and phone calls and text messages. We appreciate all of you. We love being part of the North Fargo community. So with that, we'll say goodbye. Have a good day, everyone.